Right.
Got it.
Recording.
Exactly. Okay, we've got a red light. Okay. So I guess I'll call the meeting to order. This is the Upper Rio Grande Flood Planning Group Subcommittee 2 meeting scheduled for Tuesday, 27 January, 2 p.m. And let's see, what else do I need to say?
I think we can get into the.
Welcome everybody for being here, and approval of the minutes from January 18th. I've got one correction on it that I'm going to propose, and that is that in paragraph 12, what we received included a little extra material. We didn't vote a motion or second on that. We just allowed it to happen when we selected January 27th. So it's going to be corrected to read what it should be, and I'll make that proposed correction. Are there any others?
If I may, Chair, I'm looking at the minutes that I have in Word, and that was corrected. So I'm wondering if maybe I had put up there on the minutes on the agenda if they were like in draft form. So let me just look real quick on.
Well, Chris sent this out, so it may be that what he had was an earlier draft.
Yeah, let me if I may, let me just look real quick to
see what you posted.
Because I might have done that inadvertently. So in case there's more corrections that need to be made. Yeah, let me see.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, so what I will do, because we actually, 3, 11, 12, and 13. Can we table the minutes for the next meeting so I can make all the corrections? Because
sure,
I don't have the right draft up there.
Is that okay with everybody if we table it till the next meeting?
Okay.
Okay, I see some head nods. Okay, that sounds good. That was 3. Okay.
So then, yeah.
On with the meeting goal, and you're on the hook.
All right.
So, thank you.
Was that I'm on the hook, or was that for somebody else? Annette, anything else?
Done a presentation today.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing else that Annette wants to talk about or any other general issues, I'll go ahead and get started. Let me just share my screen. Okay.
Chris, let me ask a question. In the email that you sent out, you had the actual slide set, and then you had a secondary set that had step 1, step 2, etc. for everybody. Are those integrated into the original slide set, or are those extra?
Yeah, the main slides that were highlighted are integrated into this slide deck. It's just the Excel file was provided just in case anybody wanted to kind of dig in and rearrange the order of projects, and for that reason. So, but yeah, I believe all the ones that were highlighted, and there were some original versions before sorting that I included just for informational purposes.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure. So again, the meeting goal, similar to the last meeting, is to establish prioritization for evaluating all of the FMPs. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off, although we will go back and rehash a few things. For example, when we're estimating the level of effort for the priority of FMPs in the city of El Paso, we did have a meeting with EP Water since the last meeting, and they have reorganized their priority projects, and so we'll go over those minor changes. We also met with El Paso County, as we had discussed we would in the last meeting, because there were some last minute changes right before the last meeting, and they wanted to run it by some other folks in their organization. And so we have an updated priority list from them as well, which we'll go over. And then we're going to walk through each of the regional FMPs that are outside of stormwater master plans. Since those aren't documented all in one place like the stormwater master plan projects are, we wanted to kind of make sure that there were no questions and go through maps and in short descriptions of each of those projects before we start talking about their prioritization. And we'll, after we kind of discuss all the priorities, that the latest priorities for those three groups, we will then look at the level of effort. And when we sort by the level of effort within tiers, we'll look at how those projects come out in each of those groups. And then we will discuss the remaining budget. And when we combine all the categories together, we'll look at how many we think we can get through as far as tiers in projects. Lastly, we'll just put up for a vote the discussion topics from today and any refinements to those tables. And I guess very lastly, we'll talk about the next future meeting dates for the subcommittee. Any questions about the agenda before we get started? All right. So first we'll jump into the El Paso Water / City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan. Since the previous meeting, as I mentioned, we met with Isela and from EP Water, and we took a look at where things landed once we resorted according to some of the discussion that we had last time. And the numbers that are highlighted in yellow here were the ones that EP Water ended up swapping. So basically the NW3 at number 2 used to be EA3A, which is now at number 7, and the NW26, which is now at number 3 priority, used to be this EA3B, which is now at number 9 priority. And this was swapped out just to make sure that these two projects, which are a very high priority for EP Water, were in the top tier. Since we said that we would reorganize our prioritization when we combine everything according to tiers, including the top 5 projects in each category. So they wanted to make sure these two were in the top 5 projects, and that's really all that we discussed. Are there any questions about this change, or Isela, are there any comments you would like to make?
No, so the reason why we made these changes was because these projects provide a better service to a larger service to the community than the other ones that we had. So hence the reason why the change.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so Chris,
yes.
the step one and step 2 handouts then that you did supplementally in the distribution that we did, step 2 matches what's in your briefing, right?
That's correct. Yeah. The step 1
I got what
is. Yeah, the step 1 is basically the table that we just showed in the order of the priority, sorted by priority, which is column A. And step 2 is the table I was just about to show. And the Excel file, it has a screen capture here of how these were sorted. So, within each tier, we first sorted by tier, which is in the spreadsheet, this column K. And then we sorted by level of effort, which we talked about last time, how we scored those. So that was the second level of sorting. And then if there was a tie, for example, we have a 3-way tie in the level of effort here. As a tiebreaker, we had a third level of sorting, which was the Stormwater Master Plan priority. So whichever was the higher priority jumped in front of the ones that it was tied with on level of effort. So that leaves us with this table right here. You can see tier 1 is the top 5 projects. the easiest to model is at the top. That's why the level of score is the level of effort score is the lowest. And then we've got the second tier here and the third tier at the bottom. And we have estimated project cost here. And as we mentioned last time, we have this column here for project complexity. This is a little different than the level of effort. This is more related to just the different components of the project, and this will come into play at the end when we're costing out how much fee we think that each of these projects will take to evaluate as a whole. So the red indicates that it's more complex. The green indicates it's the least complex, and yellow is medium complexity. Are there any questions about this table or any comments from EP Water before we move on to the county projects? All right. So the next set of projects I want to go over were the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan projects. Last time we had gone through the first tier of projects for these and the city projects as well in the Stormwater Master Plan. There were some potential changes. We had found out there were some changes in the watershed, new developments, proposed roadways, which could have affected this SSA4. But after meeting with the county, they decided that those changes were not substantial enough to warrant moving that project down from the top of their list. It's still their top priority. And so we left that as number one. We did move down this VIN 6 from where it was previously because there were, I believe, some changes in the watershed as well, which made that project not as high of a priority. And we also moved down SSA2 to number 20, the bottom of the list. So these were the changes that were discussed with the county. I don't know if Gilbert Saldana is on the line, if there's anything else that he would like to point out about the recent changes in priority.
Thanks, Chris. No, I think you pretty much summarized it pretty well. I think we agree on what the proposed list looks like.
All right, thank you. Anybody else, any comments about the changes here to the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan projects prioritization?
If I may, through the chair, I just wanted to ask the group with the recent announcement that was made with from Congresswoman Escobar's office on 2 storm drainage projects that were going to be awarded. Does that have any play into these projects?
No, those projects for EP Water, those projects are not on these on the list.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask just, guys, what, as an aside here, what they were, Gisela? Do you know what they were?
Yes. So one of them, it's a Clardy Fox pump station. We're doing upgrades to that pump station in the central area, mid-valley area of El Paso. So that's one of them, which we had the design and we were ready to go out to construct this in the upcoming fiscal year. And the other one is improvements to the North Gate channel, which goes from a levee into a channel and then discharges into the North Gate Dam.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so just a quick comment that all of these projects have not been awarded funding at the current time, but there is a potential for this project SOC1 and it has been shortlisted, or I believe what they requested was a more the full application for the funding. So that's why it was moved down previously to the bottom of the list, because it's likely that that one won't need funding if it ends up getting approved for the FIF grant program. So just wanted to point that one out. So if there aren't any questions about the El Paso County reorganization or reprioritization, then we'll jump into, and again, the tier one in the spreadsheet that I handed out, it was in order of this stormwater prioritization, and the tier two has the same levels of sorting as we discussed with the EP water projects. So within each tier, which is now organized by 5 projects or 5 rows. Previously, in our last meeting, it was organized by the top third or each third of the total group. So so now within each of the tiers, we sorted again by level of effort from lowest to highest. And if there was a tie, for example, these first two both have 3. Then the second level of sorting was this stormwater master plan priority. So the higher priority, or I guess lower number, was first. So these are how the projects ended up after applying that same sorting for EP water that we talked about. So any questions on this project list?
All these are in El Paso County?
Yes.
So this is other than stormwater master plan. We were trying to make sure that we paid attention to some of the ones that were outside the county?
Yeah, no, this is actually the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan projects. The next one we get to, these are those will be the ones outside of the Stormwater Master Plan projects. So these are still within El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan.
Okay, but they're non-stormwater master plan activities, right?
So we have EP Water has a master plan for projects within the city of El Paso, and then the county has stormwater master plan projects for anything within the county of El Paso, but outside the city.
Okay, I understand. Right. And what I'm looking at is one of those other handouts that you did. When I went across the bottom of the page, it said it's called non-stormwater master plan step 1 and step 2.
Right. So there is a non-stormwater master plan step 1 and step 2 in the spreadsheet. That is what we're going to talk about next. But the one we're talking about right now is the one that says there should be a tab called EP County Step 1 LOE. That's the first prioritized group. And right. Then we have EP County Step 2 LOE. That's the one we're looking at now.
Oh, okay. I got ahead of us. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. So if there aren't any questions with that, we will move on to the ones that Dave was mentioning, the ones that are outside the Stormwater Master Plan for either the city plan or the county plan. That doesn't mean that all of these projects are outside of El Paso County. It just means that they weren't within this list of prioritized projects from those stormwater master plans. So it's a little bit confusing, but to confuse things a little more, there is a project that is in the county stormwater master plan, El Paso County, but it was not in their list of prioritized projects. So we added it here, SOC4, because we know that it was one of the top priority projects for EP County, EPC WID number 1, the irrigation district in El Paso County. So we added it here instead. We also have this project, which was not in the tech memo. It was brought to our attention during a meeting with EP Water and the U.S. Army. It's a project that was on, it was a high priority for EP Water years ago but it got held up due to some wetland delineations that, since it's on Fort Bliss property, the Army needed to arrange those. And during our meeting, we found out that they recently had completed that wetland delineation. Gisela, I'm curious, did the Army ever send you the recently completed wetland delineation? I know that you all sent us a version, but I think that was an older copy. Have you received anything from the Army recently?
We haven't, but we had a meeting with them today at
great.
1, and they said that that wetland is not considered a wetland, pretty much. So it's not a wetland. So they're gonna send us a letter stating that. So
Great.
yeah, once we receive that, we can go ahead and give you a copy of it, but I'm not sure when they're gonna send it to us.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So the other one I want to discuss here, these highlighted highlighted text here are issues that either wanted to basically they're things that were not included in the tech memo. So this was just on the first project here. I just realized, after the tech memo that EP Water and EPCWID number 1 are both funding or potential sponsors for this Riverside regulated reservoir. So I just added El Paso Water to that. The total number of crossings, I think I had 14 in here. And after taking a closer look at that report, it looks like it's actually just 8 crossings. So that was an update. This total cost here was not included in the tech memo, and that's because it includes all of the improvements, which I wasn't sure that wasn't likely that we're going to be able to recommend all of the improvements that are in this. There's over 163 low water crossings in this plan. So I went ahead and filled in that total cost here for discussion purposes. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute when we go through all the projects in a little bit more detail. And then I highlighted this one, channelize sections of Alameda Creek, because it is just a concept right now, but I was waiting for the hazard mitigation plan for Presidio County because we were told from Presidio County that that project was included in it, and depending on the level of detail in that plan, it may or may not drop off from this list. So just wanted to talk about those highlights real quick. These are not in order of prioritization right now. They're currently just listed as in the order of the FMP IDs that were in the tech memo. We're going to talk about the prioritization of these next. But are there any projects, and again, we're going to go through each one of these here in a second, but any general questions about these changes? All right. Now, the next one I want to talk about is also a table that's included in the spreadsheet Excel file that y'all were provided earlier this week. And we do have some formatting issues that are applied here in this slide, just so that it's not quite so intimidating as it is in the Excel file. It's just a little bit more presentation friendly, I guess. But we hid the rows that are in between these two red columns, right? I'm sorry, we hid the columns that were in between these two scores. Basically all the columns that had to do with permitting, because they were kind of repetitive, and we can talk about those in person here. But then we also removed the descriptions just to simplify the table here. But all of the scores and the highlighting should be the same. What I wanted to point out before we talk about the projects here, because we'll talk about some of the judgment involved in these scores, but basically, if you all recall, these categories here on top and the permitting categories that we hid, and these three on the right, which are based on TWDB data that were provided for this regional flood plan. These are all categories that we agreed upon and were in the tech memo for how we would rank or prioritize projects that were outside of stormwater master plans. So this this top row, or second to top row, is the total number of points that could be awarded. And this is a qualitative assessment, qualitative scoring. We didn't run any models to come up with these numbers. They're based on judgment. And so we applied our judgment in scoring these first. And we have highlights here indicating where, you know, if somebody was not happy with how a certain project was ranked, you know, they wanted to question, you know, what scores came up with the overall ranking. They, you know, could look at these highlighted cells and see if they agree, disagree, and reach out to us, or you can bring it up here in the meeting today if you think it should be scored differently. But you know, any highlighted scores here are just very judgmental and open to interpretation. We also highlighted in blue some scores that we changed since the previous meeting, just because we were looking at these in a little bit closer detail, and we went ahead and thought that those changes should be made. So those are also open to debate if anyone disagrees. And then in green, we highlighted changes that were discussed with EPC WID number 1. We met with Omar from our subcommittee and the regional flood planning group, and he in AECOM, we discussed this project in a little bit more detail. We kind of went through the scoring in more detail, and so those highlights are in green. We also renamed this this category. Instead of reduced vulnerable buildings in the floodplain. Reduced number of vulnerable buildings in the floodplain was how it was originally titled. We thought it might be more appropriate to, after looking at the floodplains and realizing that a lot of these projects, you know, might not show up as in the floodplain based on the current floodplains out there. If we were to model them in detail, like we are planning to do in some of these cases, they might show up in this sort of non-official floodplain. So we just changed the wording. We thought it might be more appropriate to say reduce the risk to vulnerable buildings in the floodplain. So that's why that's in green. We kind of talked about that with Omar, but we hadn't talked about it with the rest of the group. So any questions so far about the general makeup of this table or any of the changes that we've made before we get into the details of the project? And as we go through the details of the project, I can talk a little bit about the scoring and the methods, how we came up with some of the scores. But basically, these are all prioritized now according to this total number of points. So they're ranked 1 through 11, with the most number of points at the top, the lowest number of points at the bottom. Any questions? This is the non-stormwater master plan qualitative tab in the Excel file that we sent out. So this shows in peach the columns that were hidden on the slide. And so you can see it was just the permitting ones, the project descriptions here. All right, if there are no questions, we'll go ahead and jump into some of the project descriptions. So this is the Riverside regulating reservoir. So one thing I'll point out is each of these projects has a map that looks like this. And this is one that we created, AECOM, because we wanted to show how we scored or why we scored these 3 columns right here, which were the TWDB data that were provided. So So that's really just to address these three columns, which are, again, reduce number of low water crossings in the floodplain, reduce the risk to vulnerable buildings in the floodplain, reduce number of critical buildings in the floodplain. And so what we have here are the best available floodplains, which are the preliminary FEMA. We also have the 500-year 0.2% flood quilt, which is the 500-year 0.2% annual chance. And then we've got the moderate flood hazard, also from the preliminary FEMA data set, which is a shaded zone X. And so that a lot of the shaded zone X is actually areas that are protected by levees, but they are still in the floodplain because the levees are not certified by FEMA at this time. So that gives you a little bit of background about some of the color shading here. As far as the buildings, we have a vulnerable building index that we used to color code. If there's a low to moderate vulnerability, then we have it as yellow. If it's moderate to high, it's orange, and if it's high, we have it as red. So we've also got fire stations, hospitals, national shelter system facilities, schools, or low water crossings as points here with these different symbols. These first four are all considered critical facilities. And this last one, this purple X, is a low water crossing. So again, it's just to address these three columns to help with the scoring system here. Any questions about these general maps or how they apply to that previous table?
Hey, Chris, I just wanted to clarify if this was shown in the flood zone because of the levees not being certified or because of interior drainage.
Right. So this is, it's a little bit of a mix, but this is right next to the levees right here. So from what we've looked at in the interior drainage, there's significantly less flooding in this area when the levees are considered in the model. So yeah, I would say primarily it is due to the levees not being certified, but there are some portions of the floodplain that would still be in there, but most of what you're seeing is due to the levees not being certified.
Got it. Thank you.
Uh-huh. All right. So this is the general area for the Riverside regulating reservoir. This is a little bit of a more detailed map, and so you can see the different components. But basically, and I didn't check firsthand, but do we have Dr. Blair or Omar from EPCWID on the call here today?
Omar can't be on it.
We do not have Omar because then we'll be over our 5, but I don't know if Dr. Blair stepped in.
Okay. Yeah, I think he was at our last meeting at the beginning, but I guess he couldn't make it today. But we talked with Dr. Blair about this project. It involves taking flow from the Riverside Canal and diverting it into this new pond. It's what they call a regulating reservoir because it's going to help them manage the flows in this canal. There is a reduction in the capacity of the canal downstream of this wasteway, which is shown as number 5. Wasteway number 1 is what it's called out as, but it's number 5 in this little figure here. Downstream, we know that the capacity is reduced in the canal, and so we went through in detail with Dr. Blair and had a call to discuss how this project might have flood mitigation benefits, because it is primarily a water supply project. It's helping the irrigation system manage their canals and how they divert water and store water from the Rio Grande. There are times of the year when they have to let water pass by that they could hold on to if they had a reservoir like this. And so this is going to help them capture some water that they would normally allow to move downstream. And so the big question was, well, we're scoring this, it's not going to get many points if there's not any flood mitigation benefits, because it's not really capturing surface water from a drainage area. It is it's like a ring dike around it, so basically it only capture whatever rain falls into it. So our discussion basically landed on we know that during the 2006 storm event, EPCWID number 1 had to divert water from the Rio Grande into the American Canal to keep certain areas of the Rio Grande from overtopping levees because they were getting close. So to be safe in that flood event, they diverted as much water as they could into this American Canal system, which would eventually be possible to get water from those diversions into this this pond here. So his answer about, you know, would the irrigation district have utilized this during that scenario, and the answer was absolutely yes. The other component, because it would, one, take pressure off of the rest of the canal system, so they'd be able to push flows through the canal system easier, and it would just be, you know, less flow in the system in general. The other component where it could have an effect is if that wasteway number 1, which is shown again as number 5 here on the map, if it were to have any maintenance issues, such as being clogged by debris or sediment, or the gate not operating properly, they would be able to divert flow into this reservoir, and then they could release it downstream at lower capacities while they worked on this reservoir here, and that would again leave flow from being pushed down into the downstream end of this canal, which has lower capacity. And if it were to flood due to some maintenance or sediment debris issues at this wasteway, it would actually flood a significant portion of San Elizario, who the town is actually adjacent to this downstream portion of the Riverside Canal. So long story short, there is a flood benefit to this project. It takes a lot of explanation to go through it if somebody were to bring it up, but we do feel confident that it would have a flood benefit. So anyways, that was part of the scoring, what went into some of the changes we talked about in scoring, which were highlighted in green in the spreadsheet. So I know that's kind of a lot. Yeah.
Chris, Jeff Bennett has a question.
Yes.
You know, we talked about off-channel regulation of floodwaters in the flood planning group more than a decade ago. And so I feel like I should at least bring up some of the unintended consequences that we discussed back then. And that is, you know, the more you hold back what little floodwaters come through, because most of it is managed in reservoirs, you exacerbate the issues of diminished flows in the forgotten reach, which is, you know, below Fort Quitman. One of those being increasing amounts of salt stored in that segment. So when water does come through, you get a, you know, highly concentrated plug of salt coming through Presidio, the state park, Big Bend National Park, and into Amistad. So, you know, regulating floodwaters, I understand the point here, but there are unintended consequences, and I think we should at least discuss them, or at least articulate them in whatever documents we're putting together.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. And yes, I believe that there were some comments from TWDB in the regional water plan, where this is a recommended project in the regional water plan, and I believe the comments did mention, decreasing flows in the Rio Grande. But one thing that I'll just mention here is that they're still collecting flows within their water rights. It's not changing their water rights. It's just when they're unable to collect flows during certain circumstances, certain times of the year, this would allow them to collect them at that time. But I do understand your point, and yes, we do have some flood management evaluations, FMEs and FMSs, that address some of those issues that you brought up. And we will have a better chance to discuss those issues in more detail in the next Subcommittee 3 meeting. So stay tuned for that. But you're right, this does have an effect of removing flow from the Rio Grande, which has a long-term effect downstream. Any other questions about this project before we move on? All right. The next one here is the Waco Bolson artificial recharge. This is another one in El Paso. This is a EP water project. It is an aquifer recharge project. So the Waco Bolson aquifer is in El Paso. It's a brackish groundwater, and this is the general location. You can see there is a floodplain here. It's very minor arroyo. There is the Painted Dunes golf course over on the right side. You've got this this roadway 2529, which is a major arterial. It's also called the Combs. And there are no buildings other than these ones for the golf course just immediately downstream. So this is a little bit better, gives you a little bit better idea of the drainage area in the project. You can see we're zoomed out quite a bit here. There's the golf course. And there are 4 ponds here in this sort of excavated arroyo. They've reshaped this arroyo, made it wider. They also have walkways that they're planning to design on, or they have designed, that walk along the top or the banks, the top of bank for the arroyos, and also they have ramps that go down to the bottom, and so they can walk along the lower portions as well. There are grade control structures in between each of the ponds, and you can see from this zoomed out photo here that they're actually going to pipe water. This is going to be treated water into these reservoirs so that they can infiltrate the ground and go to the aquifer. So it's basically primarily a water supply project. Again, this is in the regional water plan, a recommended project, and but it does have some flood benefit. Again, it's minor, but you can see that there is a drainage area that will flow into this, so it will relieve some of the flooding that would otherwise be going across Macomb Street. So that's a benefit to a major arterial, which is one of our flooding criteria. Reduce flooding of major arterial roadways. So it received some points for that. And it does reduce flooding on property, which was another one of our scoring criteria. And so I just copied and pasted some of the pond capacities here at the bottom in case anybody, the drainage area, in case anyone was interested. But yeah, that kind of sums up this project. Are there any questions? All right. This next one is the San Elizario Pond and Storm Drain System. So this is part of the historic district of San Elizario. Is anyone from San Elizario on the call here today? All right. Well, I just wanted to point out this was one that the city of San Rosario sent to us. It's in El Paso County. They have this a flooding issue in the historic district. Now you can see that they're not in the floodplain in this area. This would be more of nuisance flooding as we've described it in our scoring table. But nuisance flooding, to remind everyone, is primarily associated with storm drains and streets or intersections flooding. And so we know that some of these intersections here at the lower end of the project area flood routinely, and it has caused a lot of maintenance problems for San Rosario. So we have obtained a report that was done by Brock and Bustillos, which San Rosario provided to us. It has some conceptual designs for a storm drain system, which you can see here in blue, and a proposed detention retention pond. I believe it's primarily a retention pond. And we did receive the full report. It's a feasibility study. It actually has 3 alternatives that were evaluated. We are assuming that the city would want to select this alternative 1 because it's the only one that met most of their goals. It seemed to be the type of alternative that the regional flood plan would approve of because it addressed the 100-year flood, whereas I don't believe the other 2 did. So we are waiting on confirmation from San Rosario that this was their preferred alternative. But at this time, we have ranked this project as number 5. So it's just to the bottom of the top tier, the top 5 projects.
That's numbers.
Any questions about this one?
Well, it's number 7 on the overall. Okay.
All right. So the next one we'll talk about is the Rio Bosque Wetlands Park. And this is actually the same general area as the Riverside Regulating Reservoir. This is a wetland park that is currently existing, and there are some improvements to it that the Army Corps of Engineers are working on. They are planning on proposing 4 new floodplain grasslands, 4 new marshes, 1 new wetland, and they're enhancing 2 existing wetlands. We were actually waiting on the feasibility study. It was expected this first quarter. I kind of poked them right before this meeting saying, hey, is that ready yet? And they were able to provide it. So we haven't had a chance to go through it in detail yet. It's a pretty extensive report. We were kind of going off of just a synopsis from what we had discussed with the Corps. But well, one thing that again is another big question. So this is an environmental project, right? But there are floodplain benefits. Anytime you're adding wetlands to a floodplain, that absorbs water, that can keep areas from flooding downstream. There are some secondary benefits to flooding by providing these types of environmental benefits, which is why we've included it. But it also has, it's at the bottom of our list, not the very bottom of our list, but it didn't make it very high up. It's second to last, primarily because there were a lot of unknowns when we were going through and scoring this because we didn't have the feasibility study. So we do have that now, and it's possible that could help out the score of this one. But due to so many unknowns, but not having the information, it scored pretty low. But we do have this reduced flooding of property, which we're going to dig into that report and see if that could change things. But right now, these 3, the Waco Bolson, which we already discussed, is the third to last. This is the second to last as far as prioritization of this category of projects. Any questions? All right. Next one is SH20 Improvements. So this is a TxDOT study that was done. AECOM did this study. We looked at SH20, also known as MESA, through the city of El Paso, from Donovan Drive to Texas 20, which is sort of the area where central El Paso begins. And we've got some recommended improvements, which are all circled. There are 8 locations where improvements are recommended in this study. This study is primarily a roadway widening transportation study or a corridor study, where they were looking at if they were to widen Mesa along this stretch, what would the drainage implications be, which culverts would need to be upsized, etc. So these are the 8 improvements that we discussed. Here's the overall extent of the project. And there are HEC HMS models developed for the drainage areas at each of these crossings, and there are SWIM models for the hydraulics. So these are prioritized and ranked in the study, and these are the weighted average scores over here. So this one was actually ranked number 1 in the overall list of projects, due to all the flood benefits and some of the permitting categories that we discussed. So any questions on this one?
I have a question. Mesa is
Yes.
TxDOT property or jurisdiction. Right. So would that still qualify under Texas Water Development Board grants, or since they are a a state entity, or so how would that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we're planning on doing after this meeting is actually having a meeting with TxDOT, where we look at these projects. And we mainly look at the ones of the top priority, and we are going to discuss with them, the funding that's available, and if it's something that they would typically apply for funding through the state. But yeah, that's. We also noticed some of the other regions, have identified TxDOT projects. So it's kind of a gray area. And we're going to talk about another TxDOT project next, which, how we deal with these TxDOT projects could potentially change at this time. But we wanted to make sure and consider it at this point. But there is a chance that you're right, because it's a state entity. Maybe they wouldn't typically apply for funding through a state grant, but our reasoning for including it at this time is that, well, they have a lot of these studies that have been done, but they may not have funding to actually do the construction, and if they potentially applied for some funding opportunities, maybe that could allow these projects to happen. So it's sort of a question in our mind as well right now. And once we have these projects sort of established and ranked, we're planning on going to TxDOT and having a more detailed conversation about that. And you're right. I think TWDB should maybe be involved as well.
Hey, Chris, just an FYI, not all of Mesa Street is TxDOT jurisdiction. There's portions of it that is City of El Paso. I can't remember what the stretches are, but there are portions of it that are City of El Paso. They maintain
this whole. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. But this whole project that's considered is the TxDOT version, because it was a TxDOT study.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, it's about to be 3 o'clock there. in El Paso and 4 o'clock in Central Time Zone. If y'all want to take a quick 5-minute break, does that sound okay to everybody?
Yes.
All right. All right, let's meet back here in, see, since it's about to be 3, we'll say 3:05 Mountain Standard Time.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. All right, everybody back with us? Anybody? Should we wait for anybody?
Your chair is ready to go. Let's see.
Yeah, yes, we do. We're good.
Okay, great. One thing that Gilbert brought up during that break is that it looks like there may be some portions of that particular SH20 Mesa project that could be within city jurisdictions. So that's something else that we'll make sure to bring up to TxDOT when we meet with them. All right, I'm just making a quick note. Okay. So the next one, as I mentioned, is another TxDOT project. It's a really, you can see how zoomed out we are, how long of a stretch of road it is. This is FM 170 between Candelaria, which is over here on the north side, and Presidio, which you can see shaded over in red and with a yellow outline on the south side or right side of the map here. So all these purple crosses in here are low water crossings. There are several arroyos that come down from this mountain range and drain into the Rio Grande, which this road runs alongside the Rio Grande. You can see the floodplain there beneath the roadway. And all of the critical facilities on the map are in Presidio.
Oh, exactly.
There are
talking about it.
There are some colonias along this roadway. There are some individual houses sort of spread out, and the town of Candelaria, as I mentioned, is all the way on the other side. So this road is important for Candelaria to get to Presidio, but there's north of there is a dirt road, and if there were some flooding, they would have a very difficult time getting to Presidio, considering the number of low water crossings here. So this project, as I mentioned, has 182 actually low water crossings and 68 culvert crossings. And they have gone through and prioritized for all of the projects what are the most important based on flood depth, based on the amount of flow, and the cost of each project. So you can see this is just a snippet from a much larger table, but they have several improvements that are planned here as part of this project. And as I mentioned, if you add up all of these costs of each of the improvements, it comes out to over 49 million. So it's not likely that we would recommend all of the crossings in this stretch of roadway, but it it is possible that we could come up with a set number of crossings or a priority, but it's up for debate here. And if anybody has any strong opinions about this, it would be great to hear those, because we're kind of racking our brains on, well, how can we include this? If we include the top 10, for example, of crossings, it's still not going to get this roadway out of the floodplain, or it's not going to allow the residents of Candelaria or any of the colonias or properties along this stretch of road to get to Presidio necessarily. So how do you prioritize so many projects? Is it worth considering? And again, as Isela brought up in the last project, would TxDOT even be able to get funding through a state grant since they're a state entity? So these are all questions that we plan to bring up with TxDOT, but we wanted to bring it up with you all first, just to see if anybody had any thoughts or opinions about it.
First, there are significant wetlands just south of the town of Candelaria, right on the highway. There's rare bird sightings there all the time. It's important to local birding economy. So those any impacts to those I'd be concerned about. But you know, it's rare that all those crossings are going to be flooding at once. So it seems to me picking the biggest drainages with the most high elevation area would be a way to prioritize that. Build some sort of histogram with, you know, area at altitude, and prioritize with that. And you can see one right there just above the center in your map. That's right above your cursor there. That's pretty big and it has a lot of high elevation. Yeah, that one right there. You know, has a lot of high elevation, and we, you know, the rainfall is greater at elevation out here. So that might be one way to prioritize.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. That's helpful. So you're saying look at the highest elevation in the watershed and look at the size of the drainage areas?
Those drainage areas with the most elevation most area at elevation, you know, you could build some sort of histogram with area versus elevation or something, you know, just.
93.
Not making any sense.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I was just taking some notes here.
I see, you know, and so that must be the state park there, Chinati, in that weird little gray boundary in the middle.
Right. Yep.
So the Pinto Canyon is right in there somewhere. Where is Ruidoso? I can't tell on your map.
It is along this this stretch for sure.
Yeah, I can't.
See. I'm not seeing it either, but oops, I went back to the wrong one. Let's see if it's any better in this map. I don't think it will be. No, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where it is along here, but yeah, that is one of the colonias.
Well, so if that's the state park, you know, there's some high country there. I mean, all those three right there, that one and the next two above it, that all go to the. I'm guessing that's the top of the Sierra Vieja. Those all probably catch a lot of rain. So I think I would prioritize with that.
Okay, so the vicinity to the park might be something else to consider. They get a lot of rain.
No, it's not. There's just elevation there. You know, they've got the mountaintop. That's what I'm getting at.
That makes sense. Okay, thanks for that input. Anybody else? And just to point out, this one was one of them that we went through, and we kind of revised our scores based on, you know, thinking about the issues we discussed, which are, you know, how do you prioritize? If you just tackle the top priorities, does it really fix the whole road issue? And but yeah, that is a good point also that Jeff brought up, that it's unlikely that all be flooding at the same time. So you could still have some benefits if you were able to prioritize them in a certain way that makes sense. But yeah, you can see this one is at the top of tier 2 in the overall list. Any other comments? All right. Next one here is the Alameda Creek monitoring gauge. So this one was based on a conversation with Gary Mitchke from the Presidio County Emergency Management. And he had mentioned a few things that I'll bring up. They're not all directly related to this particular project, but you're saying that Presidio County has a reverse 911 system for emergency notification. They use National Weather Service flood warnings and gauge monitoring for emergency flood management. And they primarily coordinate with USIBWC and Jeff Davis County when there are major storm events. Jeff Davis County is upstream of Presidio. for a lot of the tributaries to the Rio Grande. So communication with them is very important. And one of their big needs that he mentioned in our phone call was that they would like to add a monitoring gauge or some type of early detection device on North Alameda Creek under the Highway 17 bridge between Marfa and the airport. He had mentioned that this would give them about the Emergency Management Center, about 5 or 10 minutes early warning that would allow them to deploy before the roads began to flood. So this was something that fell into the early warning as an FMP. I know it doesn't really seem like a project, but when you're looking at some of the examples in the guidance that's provided, anything to do with this early warning system devices, that it would be considered an FMP. So yeah, and we have a little map showing that area. And you can see Marfa downstream here. There was a death in Marfa at the last flood event they had in 2020. And it was at a low water crossing in Marfa where they were swept away. So this would be a benefit towards that type of flood issue.
Do you know how much of the
Alameda
drainage?
Creek.
Do you know how much of the drainage basin that's going to capture? Most of the stuff that comes out of Jeff Davis County goes into that reservoir in your dam on the left. If you go back to your map, see that reservoir on the left there? Yep. That's the main fork of Alameda Creek. So those other two forks on the right, I don't know how far north they got. So I'm just curious what percentage of the drainage basin they would capture with that gauge, because there's a big one there on the right that also comes out of some pretty high country for out here. And the one on the left that they want to gauge, I don't think it comes out of high country. So I'm just curious, what percentage of the events are they going to capture with that one gauge? They absolutely need something. I'm not debating that, but
Right. No, that's a good question. We'll have to look into that. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure what percent of the drainage area that would control, but that is an excellent point to consider.
You know, they don't have any gates right now for their stream crossings. The gentleman that died.
I think that might be another thought, another FMP potentially.
Put some gates.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And we do have an FME, I believe, which is talking about getting a group together for early warning system for the whole region, and it'll involve a study of what are the early warning, what are the flood warnings systems in all the different cities within the region. So that's a good idea for that FME as well. But thanks for that. Any other comments, questions? All right, let me just finish this note here. All right. Next one, let's see where that one landed. In our overall list here was number 8. So it's in the second tier there. That one's got a pretty low level of effort though, so it'll probably rise to the top of the second tier. All right, the next one is channelized sections of Alameda Creek. We're not going to spend too much time on this one because it's very vague, not well defined, as I mentioned at the moment. It was another thing that was mentioned in our conversation with Presidio County back in November. Basically, we were just told that this portion between Highway 67 and the Rio Grande that they were considering channelizing some sections, and we don't know which sections at this time. We were told that the draft version of the Presidio County Hazard Mitigation Plan would have this project in it, and we basically put it in here as a placeholder until we could get our hands on that draft plan. We had a meeting with Ray Resendez. Oops, I got the wrong date on here. I said 11/20. This was actually 1/20, January 20th, 22. Got two numbers wrong there. But this was a recent phone call. So last week, we talked with Ray from the Rio Grande COG, and he didn't know a lot about this particular project, but he said that he was in the process of getting back in touch with Gary. Gary had just gotten, I guess, back from some time off during the holidays, and he was going to make it a priority to meet with him and some of the other counties to hash out some of the remaining details needed on these hazard mitigation plans. And he's supposed to be getting back with us this week on providing those draft plans so that we can take a look. But one thing he mentioned is that in general, they don't provide really the level of detail that we're looking for when we're recommending flood mitigation projects. They're more conceptual level, and so that kind of gave us the impression that this one will probably drop off the list. It might be considered as an FME depending on how much detail we can get from the hazard mitigation plan once we get our hands on it. But there are some potential concerns with this project. We know that channelizing creeks, it could help in some areas, if they're adjacent to a roadway that floods or towns, but you can see there's not a lot of cities along this stretch. There's not very dense areas. If you do channelize significant portions of it, you're affecting infiltration into the ground. You're affecting the way sediment moves throughout the channel. So it's not the friendliest natural mitigation feature that you can think of, and so there are a lot of potential questions with this one. And since it was so vaguely defined at this point in time, it scored the lowest on our list by far here. Well, I guess by only 3 points below the real Bosque wetlands. But yeah, right now it looks like it's the only project in tier 3 since it's the 11th project ranked on that list. So,
Chris,
any questions?
The bottom half of that, the bottom half of Alameda Creek, or most of the bottom half, is ecologically significant stream segment in the state water plan.
Oh, that's good to know. I did not know that.
And we're investing tens of thousands of dollars in stream restoration in that stream.
That's right, I forgot about that.
When you say we,
the Rio Grande Joint Venture, Dixon Water Foundation, Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Okay.
I think a better thing for Marfa to do is to look upstream where all the runoff is coming from. There's a lot of denuded landscapes that have been have with heavy grazing pressure that increases runoff, and that's where their problem is. And stream restoration upstream might help them. A series of filter dams to slow water to get it to percolate into the floodplain, those kinds of things.
Great, thank you for those comments. And do you know if that project you said you're all investing in, is that in the state water plan? I'm just curious.
The project, no, it's not.
No. Okay.
But it's on one of the ecologically significant stream segments. The last one we added this with this last plan.
Okay. And is that already funded, that project you're talking about?
Partially.
Partially?
I'm trying to scale up. We've got a pilot project going. Hopefully, we should have been done by now, but finding contractors sometimes is tough. Hopefully the pilot project will be done within the next month or two, but I'd like to see 5 times what we're doing. I'm looking for funding right now. And that would, you know, that would help with the sediment input into the Alameda Creek confluence there, slowing water.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, that's actually one of our FMEs, now that I remember, that joint venture project on Alameda Creek. We have it as a flood management evaluation.
Oh, well, good. We should talk about it more later, I guess.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that. You know, maybe depending on the level of design that's already been worked out, you know, maybe it should be a project or something. So let's definitely discuss that one in more detail. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other comments on this one? All right. The next one is the Hudspeth. We got 3 left here. Hudspeth floodplain ordinance. You know, this is something that was brought up in a document that was provided by Hudspeth County. One of their goals, this is a Colonia area study and plan. One of their goals is floodplain development regulations and policies to minimize flooding impacts in the community. We also heard from Hudspeth County during some of our subcommittee meetings, and Omar also brought up that there were some issues with development regulations and how we could improve those. So that is I think it might even be mentioned in some of our FMEs and FMSs, so there might be some overlap there. But technically, this type of ordinance update falls into the FMP category, so that's why we have it here. And this one ranked in our overall group, it was number 4, so it's in the top tier. Any questions? All right, the next one is the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan, SOC number 4 project. This one was brought up by Dr. Blair initially when we had coordinated at the beginning of the regional flood planning process as one of their top priorities. They had, excuse me, they had actually done a rainfall / stormwater event report where they were analyzing some gauge data from a recent flood event in 2021. And it is basically one of these areas that he has talked about to us where a new arroyo is forming. And some of the issues causing these new arroyos to be formed in El Paso County have to do with regulating land development and also enforcing regulations on state-owned land having to do with off-road vehicles and their use. And they're noticing that this has occurred not just here, but in other places. So we noticed that the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan already had a project for this area. So that's why we have incorporated it. But it ended up falling in the overall ranking here to number 3. So it's in the top tier as well. And this is a little bit more detail. You can see where the arroyo was. We know that during this flood event, there was a significant amount of houses downstream here. You can see this kind of area where these rural community, several houses were flooded with not just water, but had feet of sediment in the buildings.
That's what I hope we pay a lot of attention to.
All right. The last one here is excavate Fort Bliss sump. We mentioned a little bit about this earlier. It's a project that we found out about through coordination with EP Water and the U.S. Army. There was a initial wetland determination, delineation, and historical evaluation report that was provided from 2016. This indicated that there were some wetlands. So we scored it, assuming that there might be some permitting issues. If I pull up the overall one that doesn't have the permitting hidden, you can see that we did have 2 negative points here for USACE permitting having to do with wetlands. It's possible that some of the wetlands Isela was talking about might not be as much of an issue. This could maybe get raised, but it's already pretty much at the top of the list. It's number 2 right now in the current ranking, but it has it's in the city of El Paso, and it's a sump that is being used for flood storage. At this time, it was constructed in the 1950s. It's built up sediment over the years. It did have some points reduced because it is on the U.S. Army property, Fort Bliss Army property. So there would need to be some significant coordination still moving forward. But it sounds like one of the first big hurdles is behind it now. So that's why we included it in this list. And it is surrounded by some dense urban areas, so there's a lot of flood benefits to it. Looks like they're going to be regrading about 300 plus acres within the sump. So yeah, that's all we have. Are there any questions on this project or any of the projects we talked about before we get into the next portion of the presentation?
Hey, Chris, just something the Army uses a lot of that area as a driver training area, and there are several steep hill masses in there that they've constructed to be able to run vehicles up and over the top of them, just to teach people to navigate a hill that they can't see where they're going. So I know I retired in 2011, but before I retired, I know they use that. Lots of units use that as a driver training area too. So there may be some things there may be some things they want to leave in there, so when it's dry, they can use it as driver training still.
Huh.
You might want to think about that. All right.
Yeah.
I've seen tanks in there on those hills and Bradleys and Humvees and just all kinds of different vehicles doing driver training in there. Historically, I don't know if they do it now or not. It's been 10 years since I retired.
All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah, to my knowledge, they don't. And for this meeting, the meeting earlier today with Fort Bliss, they said that we could proceed with the proprietary approval for a work order in that area. So whenever we're ready to do a project. But of course, it has to go through the 16 different departments to get signatures. So I guess when we first approached them with the project, we got 15 signatures, and we were just missing the environmental one, which was tied to the wetlands. So we'll see where that goes as well. But that's good that you brought that up.
Great, thank you for that.
They may not be doing it anymore.
All right. So this is the overall sorted list, which was also in the Excel file. So again, within each tier, we sorted by level of effort first. And as a tiebreaker, we then sorted by priority. So this is how the prioritization ended up after considering level of effort associated with these projects. Any questions, comments?
So I guess on the sump, is that going to change after today's meeting?
Let's see how we scored that one. It's still the top tier. It's at the bottom of the top tier, based on the level of effort. But let's see how we pull up that spreadsheet one more time. So for this one, yeah, we still have we had it as 2 -1s. So I mean, if you're saying that the worst part of the permitting is behind us, maybe it's got -1 for complexity being difficult, just because it's on that Fort Bliss property. So, you know, we could potentially make that a 0 if we know that the difficult part is behind us. That's probably the only area I could see it potentially, or maybe the permitting complexity with the USACE wetland permitting. It could also, you know, potentially be changed in that way, which would bump it up to the first priority on this list. But due to the level of effort, even if it was the #1 priority, it would not change the overall ranking in here, because the level of effort is the highest in this tier right here. So I don't think that it would change even with a higher priority. If these two were tied for the level of effort, then potentially so. But as I mentioned, the SH20 or Mesa Street project, that could drop out depending on how our conversation goes with TxDOT. So it could jump up for that reasoning.
Okay, it's just good to know. Thank you.
Sure. Any other comments? Or Dave, did you have something you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I'm looking at 2 different sets of charts. So you're looking at the next set of charts, has level of effort required to address FMPs not included in SWMPs, and then FMPs. Now, are we going at this point to overall Alt 2 as a final page to talk about, or what?
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that part yet, but first we're going to talk about the budget, and then we're going to get to those 2 alternatives where we sort everything all at once. So that's these last portions where we do the overall evaluation order, but we're just going to talk a little bit about budget before we get to that part.
Okay. I keep trying to get ahead.
So no worries, no worries. I'll try to move us along so that we can finish on time here. We wanted to just give you a brief snapshot of the budget. This is through the 14th of January, so it's a couple of weeks old, but you know, this is where we are on the tasks 1 through 4. This is our percent spent, and you know, we've spent basically 201,000 of 266,000, so we've got about 64K remaining in this task 4 that'll be used for evaluation purposes. However, there is an additional budget that can be applied, which is on actually the next slide. There was some additional budget provided by TWDB, a total of 600,000, and 116,000 of that can be applied to tasks 1 through 10. However, if it's not applied to for the purposes of outreach and data collection, then it just needs approval by the general RFPG. And so again, that's 116,000 that can be applied here. There's also an additional 350K that can be applied towards doing these FMEs after the initial draft of the regional flood plan is submitted in August. We can then start actually implementing some of the highest priority FMEs and FMSs to make them move from the FME category to the FMP category of the amended regional flood plan. So that's what that budget is for. And then this 196,000 would be towards actually going through that amendment process, whether it's a minor or major amendment. That's what that budget is for. So the bottom line here is that we have about 64K left to do these studies. based on the 76% spent, but we can apply, the full 116,000 towards that. But I wouldn't recommend at this point saying that we want to apply the full 116K, but I think if we applied half of that, which would be 58,000, that would put our total remaining at around 114K, which I think is a realistic amount considering the amount of time we have remaining before we want to get this evaluation process completed, which right now we're targeting March, April timeframe for completing these evaluations. And so based on all that information, what we've done is we've taken the 3 categories of projects, we've combined them together. And again, this is in a spreadsheet that was handed out. And the spreadsheet has the order of sorting that was applied to this one. So as a screen capture, so you can see column H, and we also put it in the column headers here, the order in which they're sorted. So first, again, it's by tier. So when you take from again, we've got the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plans, we've got the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan projects, and we've got this non-Stormwater Master Plan group of projects. And if we take all of their top tiers, which are 5 projects in each category, and sort them by that first, then we're going to end up with the top tier of all 3 categories being studied first. And the next level is by the level of effort ranking. So these tables that we just went over, which are ranked by level of effort and then priority, that's going to be the second level of sorting. So these are basically in order of those, but the third level is to alternate between each category. So if it was not in a stormwater master plan, we just called it category 1 because we know that outside of El Paso County, the rest of the region has a lot fewer projects. So we wanted that to be ranked first. We know that El Paso County, we just assigned it a number of 2, and City of El Paso a number of 3. Really, this is only used to just alternate between the 3 projects, so that as it sorts these, you can see that the first ranked project in all 3 of them get addressed first or ranked at the top, and then the second ranked project in all 3 of those categories get addressed next, and so on and so forth, so that basically we go down in order, alternating between each category. And this is the overall level of priority for how we're going to start evaluating these projects. And we've got the cost in here that we estimated for each project based on the level of complexity. So again, if it's green, that means it's a little bit more simplified project. However, depending on if it's in the county stormwater master plan or the city stormwater master plan or not in a stormwater master plan, that also affects the fee that we assumed for these particular projects. And so that's what we have added to this column here. And lastly, we've summed up the fees as we go down. So in this far right column, we've got the cumulative fee. Again, this is for doing the evaluations. So if you add the 4,000 from this to the 5,000 from the previous one, you've got the cumulative 9,000. So this just gives us an idea as we go down the list, how much fee it's going to be eating up the further we get down. So you can see that at the bottom of tier 1, we are at about 93,000 that we're expecting. We try to be conservative in our estimates, so it's possible that when we get through the first tier, we'll check back in, see how much we've spent, if we're close to this number or not. But going off of this right now, if we had about 110K, 114K remaining in this task, it's likely we'd only get through this first tier of projects fully evaluated, because we also have to keep in mind that we need to reserve some budget for writing the chapters, the chapter 4, but also we need to reserve budget for evaluating the FMEs and FMSs. And we have quite a few of those. The process is not as time intensive for modeling the FMEs, FMSs. They don't need to involve, at least the FMEs don't need to involve models. Some of the FMEs, FMSs, I mean, probably most of the FMSs would not involve modeling either. So there'll be a lot less effort involved, but we do need to reserve some for that. So according to this first method, or what we're calling alternative 1, you know, it's likely that we would get through the first tier, and then we would check back in and see how much budget we have to tackle tier 2. Tier 2 is ranked the same way as tier 1, the same level of prioritization. Again, we start with the tier, and then we rank by the level of effort ranking, and then lastly we just alternate between the different categories. And so that also applies to tiers 3 and tiers 4, which you know, I think it's at this point it's very unlikely we would get to the tier 3 or tier 4 projects. I've also highlighted in red text where we have any projects that are not in El Paso County, because it was brought up at the last meeting that it's a high priority to consider projects throughout the whole region. So that's the only difference between alternative 1 and alternative 2, is that when we get to alternative 2, we've done everything the same in tier 1, but in tier 2 we've moved up this project. It's the only other project in tier 2 that's outside of El Paso County, and we moved it up to the second project in the list. Everything else remains the same. So those are the only differences between tier 2. I'm sorry, between alt 1 and alt 2. Tier 1 projects are all exactly the same. So just wanted to stop there and see if there are any comments on this before we move to the next slide.
Are we going to remove the 13th item, evacuate Fort Bliss sump, from the list? Because of, remember Giselle said something about removing that?
No, I don't think we were planning on removing that one. I think there were, that one we're going to find out some more information about regarding the permitting through the Army, but it sounds like that most of the hurdles for that permitting process in coordination with the Army might be behind us. So, Isela, do you agree? I don't think we talked about moving this one, right?
Right. No, we don't want to remove that one.
Okay. So I think the ones that we talked about removing were the SH20, because that's a TxDOT project. That could change things, and if that drops out, but all the rest of these I don't think are likely to be removed.
So I guess on SH20, if TxDOT can't participate on the funding, maybe we can remove the portions that belong to TxDOT, and we can leave the ones that belong to city in the plan.
That's a good thought.
Chris, is there any chance that we can include the top one under tier 2 just to demonstrate that we are not selecting all these things in El Paso County, and get Presidio involved by including 16, which is the first item in tier 2? If we take the $7,000 off,
that's a really, I think that's a good comment, because that's a really sort of minor project. It's I mean, when I say minor, I mean the level of effort is minor relative to these other ones. I don't think it will really involve modeling, or at least not much. It's more of a early warning. So, I don't see any issues with that. This FM 170 is the next one, though, and that's the one that has potentially a lot of issues, a lot of questions, just because there's, so many of these low water crossings, and how do you prioritize them? It's one like 180 crossings. So yeah, if that one were at the top of the list, I would say it's not likely, but this one is pretty minor. So so yeah, I mean, I think that's a change we can make is just lump that one in.
Is it-
as tier
is it
three,
too-
we should call that all three.
Is it too late to add gates in on that gauge? I mean, you know, the gentleman that died last year crossed the stream once in floodwaters, made it, and then dropped his friend off and turned around and drove across again. And that's when he got swept downstream. If there'd been gates there, you know, early warning wouldn't have stopped that death, is what I'm getting at. Everybody already knew it was flooding. So what they need is gates.
Right. No, I don't think that would be an issue, you know, adding that to it. It would have, you know, the same type of evaluation analysis that probably give it more benefits. And it would, you know, make the project score higher to TWDB. I think that's a good comment.
Well, if we're going to remove State Highway 20 predominantly because it's mostly TxDOT, that saves you $7,000 in your estimated evaluation cost. So by adding number 16, you're still under that amount of, actually you're at 91 instead of 93. So, you know, that seems
Right.
reasonable to me. So can we add that to tier 1 then?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good comment, a good change.
I just think we need, when we go to those meetings in Presidio and Pecos, we need some information to sell.
I agree.
You know, we need to show them that we're paying attention to those areas.
Yeah, I agree. And you'll see with our FMEs and FMSs that we put in the tech memo, there's a lot of concepts and studies that we've identified that need to be done in those areas. It's just, you know, we had a lot of trouble finding detailed projects that are ready to be constructed or designed in detail, which would meet this FMP criteria.
Part of the problem there is that part of the problem out there is that some of these rural communities just put dozers in creeks and that's how they deal with flooding. You know, they just go out and do stuff. They don't need no
Yeah, you know, looking forward to our roadshow out there. We're getting ready on February 9th. We'll be in Presidio, and so yeah, hopefully we'll get to talk with some of them, and hopefully some of the counties and cities will show up, and we can, you know, talk about how they deal with it now and how we can improve those.
You might reach out to the Jeff Davis County judge and ask if he's going to be there.
Okay.
Got some ideas about flooding.
Yeah, actually, yeah, if we can't get a hold of him, and you have any sort of good ways, or if you have a relationship with him, you know, we might ask for your help, because we've had a tough time getting a hold of a lot of these county judges.
I've got a connection. I'll see what I can do.
Okay, thanks. All right. Any other comments? So these slides here just show the top tier of the two alternatives, and then we showed the second tier of the second alternative, because that's the only part that's different. But as we just discussed, we'll move this one up to the top tier because it's likely that SH20 will drop out, and it's such a small level of effort relatively, and it's outside of the El Paso County. Those are all good reasons, I think, to move it up into tier 1. All right. Well, if there are no other comments, then we'll just get to this potential subcommittee recommendations for vote. Are there any changes that anyone would like to make to this slide, which basically we left it pretty general, but I guess maybe there's one change I would probably like to make, and that would just be approval of overall, I'd say approval of refined prioritization.
Can you reference overall Alt 2 as your chart? then maybe include that chart as a reference in the vote?
Yes, so we'll say approval of refined prioritization tables and overall method for prioritization of potentially feasible FMPs discussed during this meeting for recommendation to RPG. So maybe in parentheses, I'll say overall method for prioritization of potentially feasible FMPs evaluations.
The overall alt2?
As shown in alt.
There you go.
3, we'll say alt3 table because that'll be sort of our new alternative that we'll add to this presentation since it's a little different than alt2.
Okay, but if we want to vote on it, we haven't seen alt3.
Okay, well, we can just make it alt2 and then I can just change this this slide right here. I'll just make this.
What changes are going to occur, Chris, between alt2 and alt3?
Basically,
other than including that additional item in top priority, tier 1.
That's the only change. That's the only change that would basically this would move from priority 2 or from tier 2 to tier 1. So
okay.
Yeah, we just try to put that.
Well, that's okay.
Somehow.
Is everybody, if you can nod, do you understand the tier 3 chart? I mean, alt3 will be just that one change. Does everybody understand that? Hand up, whatever. Okay. Javier, you okay with that? Good. Okay, everybody understands that, Chris. That's good. You can do a tier 3. I mean, an alt3.
Alt3. Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, I'll add that as some additional slides. We'll say alt3 at the top of the revised version. But yeah, that'll be the only change. So is everyone okay with this language?
So what we're going to show to the general membership based on this vote will be alt3?
Yes, but the only other thing that I thought we might want to mention is the additional budget, because as I mentioned, you do need approval if we're going to spend that $116,000 on any tasks that are not for public outreach. And so we would like to include an additional recommendation here, which I'll try to type up pretty quickly here, but approval of applying funding, additional funding of $116K toward task 4 A, B, or we just say task 4 in general.
So you use half that, 58?
Yeah,
I know you're talking, you said something about 58, half of it?
Right. So we can talk about that. Yeah, I think we'll only be able to spend half of it, about 58K. But I guess depending on time and how much that is needed in other categories, maybe we could spend more and get more done. So it's up to you all. If you all want to say just half for now, 58K, that is fine, and we can kind of check in later and see where we're at, and if we want to increase that amount later, then we'll need board approval again, or we could say the full 116, but yeah, I mean, I think it is possible we'll need that in some other tasks. So if you all are okay with this language, we could just keep it as at 58K for now, and then if we need to increase that later on, we'll check in at that point.
And that allows you to get through the top 16 now in overall alt2 for evaluation.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Do you need a motion?
Yes, I will hand it back to you all at this point.
If everybody's okay with that, can somebody make a motion?
I make a motion to
Motion.
approve both items as shown on the presentation.
Second.
Okay. Okay. Any further discussion?
Oh, you know what? Maybe just one thing I think I left off here. It's kind of in the top part, but I'll just say for recommendation to the RPG.
Well, that's what we were talking about doing, sure. Okay. So if no further discussion, everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That was 3. Okay, we're good to go. Motion passes.
All right. Thank you all very much. That was a big milestone for us. I know that there have been a lot of these meetings. This is our 6th one. And oh, there's some great news to share really quickly. I know we're at time, but we did get approval for the administrative completeness of our tech memo by the TWDB this week. So basically they authorized us notice to proceed and to work on, or charged to work on the task 5, which is the recommendation phase. So that's a huge celebration for us. We're really happy about that. And that means that we can expect comments from TWDB, but they don't need to be responded to necessarily. They're just mainly going to be for guidance moving forward. But yeah, so just want to share that with you all. And
Congrats.
as far as, yeah, thank you. I'll try to wrap up this last portion pretty quickly here. We are targeting the 22nd, I think I think it's the week of the 14th through the 18th for the next FME meeting. And I believe the following week, the 21st through the 25th might be open in February. I would like to, and I think the week after that, of March 28th is what we might be targeting for the next general RFPG meeting. So I'm thinking either the 21st through the 25th or the week of the 7th through the 11th for our next subcommittee 2 meeting. I'm kind of leaning more towards the latter a little bit later, just because we're going to be focusing on getting a submittal out March 7th. So if there are no objections, I'd like to propose that week, the February 7th through the 12th for the next meeting, where we'll kind of check in on some of the evaluations that we've done, and hopefully we'll have gotten some feedback from the open house meeting. So if you all are open to that, we can send out a doodle poll for that week, the 7th through the 11th.
But I thought the 7th through the 11th was the road, the open house in Pecos and Presidio.
Yeah.
That's in February 9th and 10th. This is March 7th through 11th.
Oh,
Well, you said February.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, yeah, I'm talking about March 7th through the 11th. So it's a little bit more than a month, which is, I think since we've got a lot of work to do, that's probably good to start spacing these out a little bit more. My opinion anyways, but up to you all. Does that sound okay, or did you want to check in sooner than that?
Chris, what dates did you give for the next general? After the 2nd?
We're gonna be discussing that, but at the next general RPG meeting. But what we're targeting, I believe, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're targeting the 28th of February, right?
Checking my calendar right now. That seems right, yeah.
28th Feb for
Right,
the next
and
general
then-
meeting?
For the general meeting?
Yeah, because that's the next general meeting, because that's a week before March 7th, and we have a deliverable for the second portion of the tech memo, the electronic geodatabase portion, which they pushed out some of the items to this secondary submittal date on March 7th. So we had it scheduled, or we're planning on proposing scheduling the general meeting a week before that on the 28th of February.
That's right.
Stella had a question.
Yeah, I rather have it the week of 14th through the 18th, because a week prior it's pretty much the beginning of our fiscal year in our board meeting, so it's a little bit more complicated. So if we can do it the week of the 14th through the 18th, that'll work better for me at least.
Sure, that works for me. Any other objections to that? I don't object.
Javier, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Gilbert? Captain Gilbert?
Yeah, that works for me as well. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Jeff, you're okay with that?
Or
Mr. Bennett, you're good?
We're talking March 14 through 17 or 18. Looks pretty open at the moment.
Okay.
We just
Fills up
filled
soon.
Okay. I guess we're at a point where we need a motion to adjourn then.
So moved.
Jeff, all right.
Second.
Still a second.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
thank you all.
Nos vemos.
See you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Feel better, Javier.